Hello, Amanda. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so it's very similar to last week's episode with Jeffrey Pranky. If you guys haven't heard that, make sure to go check that out. I met Amanda Assalone through the KAC networking night. And is it correct that you are also a board member of KAC?
Yes, I'm a board member. This will be my second year as a board member with KAC, and I have moved into a co-VP position on the board now.
Oh, wow, awesome. Yeah. And again, if you guys haven't caught, Amanda's last name isn't the typical Korean last name. And so, yeah, we're hoping to kind of capture your life story as an adoptee. But before we kind of get into your childhood and all that, can you give us just a brief intro, who you are, what you do, and things like that?
Sure. Yes. So I am living in Atlanta, Georgia. I've been here about 5 years now. I did grow up as a Korean adoptee in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I was adopted from Seoul, Korea at 3 months old and grew up in Tulsa. My parents, my dad, my last name's Italian. So he is Italian American and my mom is more like Irish German. And I also have a sister who was adopted from Korea as well, like a year after me. So we were both babies. And yeah, we grew up there. I left Tulsa and kind of just started moving around back in 2007. So it's been a while since I've lived there. But I go back. My sister and my mom still live there.
Oh.
So what I did was I went through my career and background has been all in education, started out in school counseling, student affairs, and now I work in higher education research at the University of Tennessee. But I live in Atlanta. And
oh, interesting.
Yeah,
how does that work? Is it a fully remote position or?
It is. It's a fully remote position. I moved here actually after completing my doctoral program. I did a postdoc here in Atlanta, but I really liked it a lot and I really want to stay here.
Mm-hmm.
And I happened to just get really lucky and I found a position with the University of Tennessee and they are letting me work remote from Atlanta for now. And then because of the pandemic, it's also worked out too. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have introduced you as a Dr. Amanda, right?
Oh, yeah, no.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, and I also started teaching in the higher ed program last summer. So that's been a fun experience this year.
Okay, great. Wow. And so I didn't get to ask Jeffrey this question, but I wanted to ask you, is your involvement with KAC as a result of kind of you trying to rediscover, or I guess discover your Korean roots, or like how did you get involved with that organization?
Yeah, no, it kind of is. So growing up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I was adopted in the 70s. And when you were adopted from Korea in the 70s, 80s, you're kind of your parents were just like advised to just assimilate us to whatever culture they're in. So I very much grew up in a white community. My sister was pretty much the only other Asian American I knew and did not know anything about being Korean or even really Asian American. As I got into college and started like working more like kind of out of my bubble community of Tulsa, I became more interested in, my ethnic background. And actually as a doctoral student, and this is like well into my 30s, I went back and did my doctoral work. I guess I was around 32 at the time. I just started getting interested in like Asian American students and how to advise them. Growing up, in all the spaces I worked, I was usually pretty much, the only Asian and mostly the only person of color who wasn't white. So I would like, if there were students when I was a high school counselor, they kind of like students of color, they just kind of flocked to me. But I was also used to very much as a token, like person of color and all the pictures and all that stuff, pretty much my whole life. But when I was asked to talk about, my experiences, it was very hard to articulate that because I never talked about it before. We pretty much grew up in a very colorblind society. So when I started doing my doctoral work, we were studying lots of different students of color. My advisor was a Native scholar and she studied a lot of Native American students. So I kind of became interested in studying Asian American students. And that's how I kind of got into exploring, what it's like to be Asian American and go through, school with the model minority myth stereotype on you and all that. And that kind of led me to open up more with my identity as a Korean adoptee. And I got involved in the Korean adoptee community on a national level, started going to those conferences. My dissertation was all on Asian American community college students. And that work, that work connected me to a lot of Asian American networks. But it's funny because then I'd go back to Tulsa and then all my friends who are all pretty much white, were like, what are you doing? Because they didn't see me as being Asian American or even Korean. In fact, I remember one friend asking me, like, why are you doing this work? I thought that, you were from Asia, but I guess she didn't realize that Korea is in Asia. So like, when you have those types of experiences growing, you just, it's interesting. So where do you go from there? Yeah. So, that brought me to Atlanta, and then I worked for a civil rights higher education program here. It's a foundation, and I was able to continue doing like Asian American work. But then I happened to run into Jang Wook, who you also interviewed, at an Asian American Advancing Justice summit, or was it a summit? It was like I think it was like a one-day program that they had, and I decided to just go on my own. I had heard there was a really large Korean community in Atlanta, but I hadn't really connected with it yet. And so Jung, I remember meeting her. I got lost and I couldn't find my car because we were downtown somewhere, and I didn't even remember which parking lot I parked in. So she just stopped me at the elevator, and I told her I was lost, and she just helped me find my car.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, and then we became friends after that. We connected, and then she introduced me to the KAC community.
I see. Oh, wow. Oh, cool, cool.
Yeah.
That's I'm really interested in hearing kind of your whole life story. One of the questions I asked Jeffrey, and I still think it's a silly question, but I need to ask, like, were you always aware that you were adopted? Like, you look different? Or was there a point in your childhood where you suddenly realized, oh, I must be adopted? Or like, how did that kind of journey start for you?
Yeah, so no, we were always aware. I mean, my parents are very, very white, like very different. And so it's obvious that we're adopted, and they never like held that back at all. And in fact, growing up in Tulsa, there was a community, about a small little community, because actually I was adopted through Dillon International, and their headquarters is in Tulsa. So my parents became friends with another couple who had adopted some children from Korea. And then there was just a handful of us. So we would have like little reunions like once a year. And that pretty much went on. I think kids ended up moving away. I think I was around 10. But this was before, like now they have all these like Korean adoptee cultural camps and stuff. But they don't, I think they do that now in Tulsa, but they did not do that in the 80s. So I always knew I was adopted. I always knew I was different. I never really thought I was white, like, a lot of adoptees think they are. But I did sometimes forget some, because sometimes you just forget. You kind of do just not even thinking about your race or background or anything until you're like, you step out of your circle and someone reminds you.
So would you say growing up, you had a positive, because I mean, I'm trying to be careful here because this can be kind of a personal question, but you hear some stories about adoptees having negative experiences with their adoptive parents. But how was your experience growing up in a Caucasian family?
Yeah, so my experience, I would say, is definitely a positive experience. It was good. My parents, they're a little bit older, so like by the time they decided to adopt my sister and I, they were really ready to just be parents and focus on their children. So they made us definitely a priority, and anything we needed or wanted, like they provided. And so yes, my experience was a good one. We were very active, involved in school and extracurricular activities. They kind of did, I would say they did shelter us a lot, so they made sure to be very selective on who we were around. Not to say we didn't experience racism, because we did, but it wasn't like, we weren't bullied, like, like a lot of adoptees unfortunately have experienced. And that's another thing too, like there are so many of us, that everyone's experience is very different and unique.
Yeah.
And as I've become more active and involved in the adoptee community, I do realize that I really was lucky. I really was one of the lucky ones, because it could have been totally the opposite. So yeah.
So then, I'm guessing your early childhood generally positive. Although you did kind of run into the whole like racism thing from here and there. But when would you say, like, or actually, let me ask this question first. Did you ever have kind of an internal identity crisis? Because the way that you look and like the culture and the way that you were raised, were very different, right?
Yes.
So when would you say that your earliest recollection of that internal conflict like started bubbling up?
I mean, I don't really know if I ever really had a crisis. Maybe like when I really started becoming interested, and that would be towards the end of like my doctoral program in my 30s, which is common for a lot of adoptees too, they don't really start thinking about. And this was also a time like, I will share that I was married, and I didn't feel like I was very connected, to the person who I married. And yes, and he is white. And so when I became more interested in my Asian American identity, and I didn't really feel like he was much of a support for that. So maybe that could have been maybe my crisis. I don't know. And going through the divorce and wanting to like discover, who I am. And that's kind of what brought me to Atlanta. And, I became more interested in being around more Asian Americans, Korean Americans. And I guess I'm still there. So, but I mean, there were definitely times through my childhood where, I would be interested in, in learning more about, Asian Americans and Korean Americans. I just didn't have the resources available to me to help me. So, you would meet someone who was Asian American, and you would talk to them and you get excited. But then where do you go from there?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
but
So you said it was common that adoptees start kind of exploring their Asian roots in the 30s. That's surprising to me because I would have imagined that, because a lot of us go through kind of this like figuring out your identity kind of thing, like late high school, like college, right? But do you have any sense of idea why in their 30s it's more common for adoptees to explore their roots?
Yeah, so I think it's more maybe the adoptees who were adopted in the 70s and 80s who didn't have a chance to really connect with any type of Asian American community, because I do feel like the younger generation who's adopted now, they kind of they are when they get to college, because like they have those resources there. When we went to college in the 90s, in the early 90s, middle 90s, whatever, it still was very much like a colorblind society, like, and I think, and that also depends on where you go to college too. Me growing up in Oklahoma, and I also went to college in Oklahoma, there just wasn't a lot of diversity at the time. I do remember like the president of the Asian American Association at my university, which was super small, actually was half Black and half Asian. And he looked more Black than Asian. And I remember he tried to get me involved, and I was just like, no, like I look very much more Asian than you. And this is really weird for me. But I think why it happens maybe, and this is what I've thought about, is it's like, I think by the time you get to the 30s, you've kind of figured out everything you can about yourself. Like you've finished your education, you've gotten maybe more into your career path, you've kind of probably got married, started having kids, settle down a little bit more. And so I think kind of like, that's kind of one of the things that's left, that's kind of in the back of your mind, wondering about is, where am I from? Who am I? Like, and then because you do grow up your whole life, everybody who meets you, who they don't know you as an adoptee, they ask you where you're from, if you know the language, if you've ever tried to find your birth parents, they ask you a ton of questions about being Korean, and you can't answer. So maybe by the time, you're in your 30s, which I think it felt like for me, I kind of wanted to know those answers. So
Oh,
that's kind of
wow.
maybe what I'm thinking might be it. But everybody has their own reason. So also, I think a lot of people I know who started having children, they want to explore because of medical reasons for their kids and stuff.
Oh, I see. For more
Yeah.
of a comprehensive family history and all that.
Yes.
I see. I see.
Yeah.
So then, when you started like wondering about these things, did you have any sort of tension about, because I'm sure there is at a certain point where you kind of want to reject your Asianness, right? Because you're
Mhm.
surrounded by all these, white people. So,
Mhm.
how were you able to kind of reconcile those things? Like reconcile your desire to reject the way you look versus,
Mhm.
well, I'm actually starting to become more curious about it.
Yeah, I think it was during my 20s, maybe up until most of like being younger, you just want to fit in and look like everyone else.
Right.
And yeah, that's what I tried to do. I think that most people do. And then I think just as you get older and you just start becoming more confident and like you start accomplishing stuff in life, you feel better about yourself. You kind of do, in fact, start embracing your uniqueness. So
Mm,
I think it's just something I just grew into as I like grew, developed and matured and stuff. So yeah, so I joke like most of my pretty much through high school and the early part of my 20s, I would color my hair and highlight my hair. And then one day I was like, I'm sick of this. I really like having Asian dark hair. So,
mm,
I'm going to embrace that. And yeah, you kind of go through a period where you're just, yeah, you want to just be yourself and you're proud of who you are.
wow.
Um, yeah, so I don't really know when or how. I think I just, yeah, I think maybe after graduate school,
Mhm.
I realized like I was really confident and happy with who I was. So
Gotcha. So
yeah.
then can you kind of walk us through, so like from the moment you started, let's say the moment you moved to Atlanta, you met Jungwook, you kind of started exploring the Asian American community,
Mhm.
leading up to, because you actually, went through a process of like trying to reach out to your birth family and all of that, right? So
Right.
can you kind of walk us through that process, like what you were going through internally, like did you have like the conflict because you feel bad towards your adoptive parents, but you also are curious, can you just walk
Yeah.
us through that whole process?
Sure. Yes and no. It was it was really interesting. So when I became friends with Jung, her husband's actually also a Korean adoptee, so I kind of befriended him
Oh.
too. Yes, and we actually, and I knew the Korean adoptees on the national level because I started going to Con, which is one of the Korean adoptee conferences. That's like it's a local one, and then I had heard that there was a huge adoptee community also in Atlanta. So we kind of became more involved in that. At the time, we were doing more social stuff where we were just meeting for lunches or dinners, and it was just a handful of us. And then there was a little handful of us who decided to start up like an actual association group. And so I was kind of one of the ones who was co-leading that, and it's the Korean Adoptee Association of Georgia. And we got connected with we were already connected with Casey, and they actually invited us to do this like empowerment workshop for one of the events they had, to just kind of introduce the adoptee community in Atlanta to the Korean community.
Mm.
So we did that, got connected with the Korean consulate, and then they started kind of inviting us to do more stuff with them, like dinners and stuff. And also, like, Korea right now is going through a lot of like, they really feel bad about like adopting out so many of their children. I mean, I think the numbers change all the time. Like, I think it's like over 400,000 probably were adopted since the like
Wow.
out. And Korea is also recognized as like the country who adopted out the most kids. So um,
Huh.
yeah, so they are trying to do what they can to, like, I guess, just help us as adoptees, because a lot of adoptees have gone back to Korea, who were, basically saying our lives were not perfect or great, and a lot of
Mm.
adoptees are angry and they did not have great experiences. And in fact, a lot of adoptees also don't have citizenship. So they're being like, yeah, they're being sent back to Korea, you know, from the
Wait, so
deported. Yeah.
adoptees who grew up in America don't have American citizenships?
Yes, yes. So that's another organization too. Yes. So there are
Wow.
adoptees. Yes, there are adoptees who ended up getting adopted to the U.S. whose parents, for whatever reasons, didn't get them naturalized, or they were rehomed, which means they were adopted and moved around a lot, or they were just neglected. They got lost in the system. Yes. So they, yeah. So there have been adoptees that have been deported back to Korea and other
Wow.
countries as well.
Mm.
So anyway, so we got going with the Adoptee Association. We started doing more stuff, connected with other adoptee associations in the U.S. And then there's the welfare, government welfare program. I can't remember the name for some reason, but it used to be Korean Adoptee Services, but they came down from Korea. I think now it's like the NCRC, National Center for the Rights of the Children is what it's called. So it's a Korean organization that came down to Georgia, and they took us out to dinner, and they pretty much gave us this like form, and they said, hey, if you're interested in looking for your birth family, you can fill out this form and send it back to us. And I had never really thought about it. Like most adoptees, like it's like, you know, you just think you can't, because I grew up, and that's another thing too. I grew up, the paperwork that they gave me as an adoptee is a lie, which most of it is, because they try to make everything sound really positive and great. So my story, or not positive and great, I'm sorry, they tried to make it seem like make sense why you were given up. So my story was, my mom was a single mom, and she was very young, and her and my birth father had a big argument, and he ran off and left her. Then she realized she was pregnant with me, and that's why she went and she gave me up for adoption. So, you know, and she wanted, yeah. So that was the story that I had for pretty much 40 years of my life. So I was like, okay, there's no way I'm going to find this woman. She's like, you know, I hope she's doing well or whatever, but you know, she's probably remarried, moved on, whatever. So I sat on this form for a while, and I was like, you know, and this is kind of the same story as Jeffrey. He had a friend give him the form. So I decided on a whim, you know what, I'm going to just fill this out and send it in. Because I also know a lot of other adoptees who have been trying to find their birth family since like their childhood, and they have had, you know, no luck. Well, 3 months later, I get a letter basically saying, yeah, we found your family, and you are the sixth daughter, and the reason why you were given up for adoption is because your father, so your parents are, you know, still married. Unfortunately, my birth father had passed away a year before. So it was actually my oldest sister who was like writing the letter. And my mom is in a nursing home with Alzheimer's. So they were like, but you're the sixth sister, and the reason why you were given up for adoption is because your father was the oldest son of a family, and he had a lot of pressure to have a son. So they kept trying to have children, and I guess I was like the last try or whatever, and it, you know, so that's why I was given up. And so that was like a huge okay. So I processed that. I think I'm still processing that.
Yeah.
And then I went, you know, and I met them in the summer of 2019. I got to go to Korea for the first time and meet them. I met my sisters. I met my birth mom in the nursing home. And I've stayed in contact with my sisters. They're all great. They all like, yes, I do like, because we've only met in person, well, twice, because we got to get together twice when I was in Korea. And it was through a translator. I don't know all their, you know, their stories. I do know that like the grandmother was a really evil lady, they say, and she had put a lot of pressure on my dad. And she was very angry for him not having a son, because I guess my grandfather, my dad's father, had died young and left her with the family business or whatever. And she had a lot, I guess, I don't think she was a very happy woman from what I hear. But that she kind of took in the older three daughters, I think, but the last two daughters she didn't want anything to do with. And so that made it hard on my mom, because my dad was like in the construction business and traveling overseas a lot. And so that, So it was interesting.
Yeah.
So to, find out all that, but it does look like they grew up. They're very close. They send me pictures of them growing up together, and they get together all the time. So yeah, that was nice to see that they are a very close family.
Yeah.
All of them except for one they've gotten married and they have kids too.
Oh
So
wow. Wait, so just to go back a little bit, because for your entire life, right? You think,
Mhm.
oh, my mom was a single mom and she couldn't take. So when you found out the truth, like, what did you like? How did you? What were the emotions that came up?
Yeah, a lot of emotions. I think I've gone through all the emotions. You do go through a little, like, of course, shock, and then maybe a little sad, a little angry, like, what the heck,
Yeah.
and yeah, sometimes I think I still go through that, but then, at the end of the day, and I think I am lucky, I am happy with where I am in my life right now, and
Mm.
in who I am. And, I wouldn't be here if I wasn't adopted. So,
Right.
you know, I, yeah, I definitely think, I don't hold any, grudges. And I'm kind of in the mindset, let's just move forward and make the best of the situation. Yeah, I mean, and
That's
I
awesome.
will, sometimes when my sisters do share pictures of them together as kids,
Mm.
like, yeah, I might have a minute or a second, where I'm like, dang, I could have been there. But then I'm like, no, this is my life.
Mm.
It's okay, but like a lot of adoptees, and this is where I became friends with Jeffrey, like pretty close with him and some other adoptees who've been in reunion. A lot of adoptees think, you reunite with your birth family and your life is just perfect and whatever. No, it just
Yeah.
opens up a whole different um, bunch of stuff,
Yeah. Yeah.
and yeah, so hopefully after the pandemic, I can get back to Korea and start, getting to know them more.
Mm.
Right now, we just talk through Kakao Talk,
Yeah.
and it's not, like I'm not to the point where I can like pick up and do a video call with them at all.
Right.
But it is making me feel like more connected to the Korean American community. I'm trying to learn the language. I did start taking classes. I'm not taking them right now, but I did
Mhm.
start taking classes to try to learn so that I can communicate with them. I've gotten into watching a lot of Korean dramas lately. And I love the food. Like I love Korean food. I pretty much eat it like almost every day. So
Oh, wow. And one thing that I learned from my interview with Jeffrey was that the reunification can't really happen unless both sides are willing, right?
yes, yes.
So like, what were your sisters trying to contact you for a while before you finally said, "Oh yeah, I'll give this a shot," and you filled out the form and sent it in, or like, how did the timing of that work?
Yeah, no, I don't think they were. But what was interesting is my oldest sister remembers my mom being pregnant with me and leaving and coming back really sad. And she thought that I had died. But then my youngest sister, I guess she said there was a period, I think in her early 20s or something, where like all of her sisters were getting married and moving out of the house or something, and she was really depressed. And my birth mother confided in her, well, there's another sister. You have a sister out there, and please promise me you'll go find her. So I think
Wow.
she went. Yeah, she did go to the older sisters and said and told them, but they were like, no, 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 the baby died or something. And so
Mm,
they had been told about me, or they knew that, but they didn't know what to do.
mm.
It's kind of like, like, yeah, you don't really know, how do you go about finding your sister, the
Yeah.
adopt, yeah. So, and then my mom, I think at the time had Alzheimer's, so she couldn't really talk or tell them. So
Oh, so that's why your older sisters were thinking, oh, she's just confused, like the baby died and she doesn't.
I guess, I don't
Mm.
know. Well, maybe, I mean, at the time when she told my sister, I don't think she had Alzheimer's,
Oh, I see, I see.
but yeah, at that moment, I think, I don't know. Cause
Mhm.
those are some of the things that when you're dealing with a translator, you have limited questions you can ask. And
Right.
yeah, and that whole experience reuniting with the translators, that's another whole experience that is very, very strange
Mm.
because yeah, Koreans are very private people and they don't want
Yeah.
to share a lot of stuff with a stranger. And so, we had to be very, yeah, it was very surface level at first, but
Mm.
But I clicked with my sisters immediately. I felt like, yeah, they're a very fun group, people. Even the translator who was with me said, she really enjoyed spending the day with them
Mm.
too. So, yeah,
So do they look like you?
they
Um,
do. Yes.
so how was that like? Suddenly seeing like five people that kind of look similar to you just met.
That was strange. Yeah. And I look a lot like my birth father. So I saw a lot of their pictures and they gave me some pictures. But yeah, no, it's very fun. It's fun. Yeah. Because you grow up not looking like anyone in your family. So, but yeah. And then like one of my sister's like daughters, I feel like we resemble each other a lot too. And especially, when I was younger. So yeah, it's neat. Yeah.
Mm.
It's really cool. It's a cool experience. Yeah.
Wow, wow. So
Yeah.
then can I ask you about your journey now? So you've met your birth family, you talk to them through text sometimes,
Mhm.
but it sounds like you are now kind of a little bit more open to embracing the Korean culture. Like you were saying, you eat Korean food all the time. So how has that process been? Because you're entering a completely foreign culture, right? And
Yeah,
you're trying to embrace it. So how has
yeah.
that journey been?
I mean, I love it. It's very exciting. I do feel like I was ready for this. I was open for this. I'm pretty open-minded, and yeah, I feel like I'm learning something new every day, which I
Mhm.
like. Um, I'm meeting more people. I met you, through
Yeah.
Casey. Yeah, it's been great. So I never really considered myself a foodie. Like growing up, I didn't really I had a lot of like, I guess you would say, like stomach issues with a lot of like the food I would eat, like Italian food or like,
Mm.
and stuff. So, but for some reason, I feel like the Korean food just sits well with me. And I think it's just I don't know, they say it's like comfort food. Us adoptees call it comfort food. So I love it. Like it's the first time where I actually crave something to eat. I think before food was always something that you just had to eat to live, but
Mm.
now you and then you change to live to eat, so,
Yeah.
but yeah, so that's been great. Yeah, just like talking and learning about, the history and just how like cultural norms in Korea and, comparing it to with what, my norms were. And yeah, growing up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So it's neat. I really
Can I ask, what are some of the more shocking things about the Korean culture that you learned that you were just like, whoa, that's so weird?
Well, the whole, having a boy back then and and I get it because it's
Mm.
kind of similar to the Italian culture too, which I also was kind of, raised in. The oldest son is a big deal and the oldest son has a lot of responsibilities. Um, and how like women, just traditionally women just really don't really matter,
Mm.
so that, has been something, to get used to. And, because that's not how it is, in America.
Right.
Um, something else I think is funny is just like how, I don't know how to like, Koreans really, really just stick with Koreans. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like they're such a group that just they're not really interested in, a lot of Koreans aren't interested in interacting or engaging with other people unless you're Korean. And like oh yeah, I don't know how to explain this. Like, so like some people, like when they say American, even though there's a lot of Korean Americans, like when they say American, they mean white or black. They don't mean Asian.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That took a while to get, when somebody was like, oh, like they asked me if my ex-husband was American. I'm like, what? I'm American,
Right. Right.
So just stuff like that. You
Mm.
know, yeah. What other? I'm sure there's a ton of stuff. I'm just, yeah.
Do you feel like then when you engage with other Korean Americans, do you sometimes feel like their level of engagement falls when you reveal that you were adopted, or have you had any experience like that?
Um, it depends. I think I've been very fortunate where I have been around a lot of Koreans that have been very welcoming and open and interested in my
Mm.
background. I haven't really run across any that were like just I don't want anything to do with you, you know,
Oh, that's right.
which I know a lot of adoptees have had that experience. But no, I feel like I've been very lucky to just, so I do, maybe, I think maybe sometimes when I've met adoptees, or not adoptees, I'm sorry, I've met other Korean, they maybe don't know what to say to me. So, you know, but you know, which I guess I'm used to, but I think that's also with anybody, you know, when you say you're adopted from Korea, it takes a minute for them to be like, oh, okay, you know, unless they know someone else who's adopted from Korea, this is something new to them. But, you know, I did get involved in NUAC. So Sarah Park has been great. Sarah and Mike Park, they're also members of the KAC. Actually, Sarah's president now of KAC.
Oh.
She got me involved in NUAC. And NUAC, I don't really know, I can't remember it's like the National Unification something, but you know, I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's a traditionally first generation Korean organization, and they are focused in like engaging all Koreans from all over the world together to try to get the two countries unified. Is that right? Or reunited or what? Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So she got me involved in that because I think she's younger, she's wanting the organization to be more inclusive of like second gen Korean Americans and adoptees overseas and stuff. So that I did that for almost a year, and every event that we went to was all spoken only in Korean. So it wasn't a great experience for me on that because I didn't understand anything that was going on. But the people, when I actually would talk to them one-on-one, they were very friendly, and they were like, you know, very much like, let me know if you need any help and I'll help you, like, you know, with the translation. But all the communication and all the events were in Korean. So pretty much after the 1 year, I was like, this isn't for me, you know, but I gave it a shot. And I learned a lot from it. You know, because, and so I would say, and it's going back to your question, I would say that organization was probably the first time I maybe experienced some Koreans who really did not want anything to do with me because I was adopted, because, you know, because I feel like that's more of a networking organization. And when they met me, they were like, I can't get anything from you. You can't help me. So I did feel that way, you know, so maybe that's like the first time I felt like kind of like really much like a big outsider, like I don't belong here.
Wow. You know, the thing that's really shocking to me, as I talk to you guys, I'm learning that there are a lot of organizations out there that are trying to support, you know, adoptees, or like, you know, trying to get them kind of connected with the larger Korean group. So do you feel like they're effective? Just in terms of their purpose and goals?
I do. But, you know, as an they are if you want it. You know, it's kind of like anything you do, you have to really what you want out of it and what your goals are. Yeah, you can get them. If you really want to engage with other adoptees in the Korean community, yes, you can go join these orgs and they will welcome you and you can do it. It's not easy and you really have to want it bad, or, you know, and one bad experience could turn away, could push anyone away.
Right.
But yeah, no, but the thing is with adoptees, a lot of adoptees struggle with, you know, how do they even initiate that and start that? Like, where do I go? You know, it's hard. I don't know, you know, like I have, you know, my sister, for example, who's still in Tulsa, she's the opposite of me. Like, you know, exploring her identity and background, like she does it in little spurts, I guess, but she's not going to just jump in like I did, you know, because it's a constant reminder that you are very different when you pretty much spend your whole life trying not to have that feeling, you know, and because a part of you, you know, this is, you know, you are interested. I think, you know, a lot of adoptees will try to say, oh, I was never interested in finding my family or never interested in finding my background or whatever. And I mean, I don't know, maybe you go through times, you know, but I think everybody, just being a human, has that like curiosity, you know, where did I come from?
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
so
Can you then speak a little bit on a macro level? Because you have met a lot of other Korean American or Korean adoptees, sorry. Like what are some experiences? Because what I'm hearing from you and like from Jeffrey, like you guys have, you know, generally positive experiences with both your adoptive parents and with like the reunification process. But I mean, you guys both made it a point to put the disclaimer out there that that's not always the case, right? So like what happens to some of the people that don't have a positive experience?
Well, we have support groups. We have like, Korean adoptee Facebook groups. We have these conferences that you can come to if you're interested, in doing that, which is hard. I think every city has like a Korean adoptee group that they get together for dinners and lunches, where people can just get together with each other. I think, some adoptees just don't ever want anything to do with being adopted or Korean, and that's fine. Like they just don't want, they just find their whatever other interests they're in, and that's where they go. I got involved, I get involved with organizations. I've always kind of been like that. Like there is the one organization, Adoptees for Justice, which I was very involved in last year. And they are basically focused right now on passing the Adoptee Citizenship Act, and getting that through, the Senate, and getting that passed so that all adoptees who are adopted internationally will automatically have citizenship. So
that blows my mind that there are people who literally, I mean, they grew up here. That's their culture. This is their like home, but then they're told suddenly like they have to go somewhere that's completely foreign to them, and like, oh, you don't belong here, so you have to go back. That's crazy that happens.
Yeah, I definitely recommend looking up Adoptees for Justice in Korean. I think that's one of the reasons why the Korean government stepped in and all of a sudden started really like wanting to do something to help us, because Philip Clay is a Korean adoptee who was adopted to the United States. He got in some trouble. He had like serious mental issues. A lot of adoptees who are adopted, of course, like, older, and they are like grow up in an orphanage and then they're, adopted into this like foreign country. You're going to have some issues that need to be addressed. And if you're not with the right type of family that's going to help you address those issues, they're just, they're not going to go away. And so he ended up getting deported back to Korea, and he ended up committing suicide. I think he jumped off a building, but it was a huge deal because he was pretty much known there, like he kept ending up in the prison and they couldn't help him because Korea at the time didn't have, they weren't addressing mental illness. They didn't have the resources to help him. So I think after that happened, and there was a huge outcry by the adoptee community that like, we need help, that's when the government started actually trying to do stuff. And they are. I mean, they're doing the best they can. But no, there's a lot of adoptees who do suffer from severe depression, addiction, suicide, and we do have these support groups that are like Facebook groups and stuff, and organizations that I know a lot of people in Georgia, they found out that I'm leading some of the stuff with the adoptees here in Georgia. So they'll reach out to me and they'll ask if I know of a counselor who specializes in international adoption, and I will, send them what I know. And
wow.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep.
So then let me ask, if as a Korean American, me personally, is there anything that I can be doing to help the Korean adoptee community?
There's lots of ways to engage with us. Yeah, sure. If you want to learn more about like Adoptees for Justice and their work that they do. If you are connected to anyone like on the political, like in the House or the Senate, who could help with getting resolutions signed and passed. Georgia actually did pass a state resolution supporting this bill. So Georgia's done a lot. And we have we have Asian Americans Advancing Justice, which is an excellent organization. And actually Stephanie Cho is the executive director of it. And she's also a Korean adoptee. They have done a lot for adoptees without citizenship, getting the information out and the support. What is the station? The Korean station. What is the Korean television station?
KTN. Yeah.
Yes. So KTN did a fundraiser for us a couple years ago, and they raised a lot of money for the Adoptees for Justice, and invited us. It was like yeah, pretty much all day event. They had like a festival going on, flea markets. People were selling stuff at their radio, at their television station.
Hmm.
So yeah, whenever we do events like that, just spread the word, and and that's yeah, those are some ways. A lot of stuff, of course, this last year, we haven't been able to do anything.
Right, because of COVID, yeah.
Yeah, so
Adoptees, adoptees for justice, is that what it's called?
Adoptees for Justice. Yes, adopteesforjustice.org.
Okay. And are there any other kind of organizations that like other Korean Americans can kind of follow to help, spread the news of what they're doing or like support them in any way?
Sure. The ones that I've gotten involved in, like
Mhm.
con.net, is that so it's KAAN.
Mhm.
That's like one of the stronger ones that's like in the US. ICA, which is the International Korean Adoptee Association, that's like an international one. That's actually when I went back 2 years ago to meet my birth family, I actually went to that conference because they bring in adoptees from all over the world.
Oh, wow.
So it was a really cool experience, and they do conferences. So at these conferences, people are wondering, like, there are like workshops that people put on, like some ones like on. I always did a relationship one. There's like identity. There's other stuff like just adoptee issues that you don't normally get to talk to other adoptees about. They have those types of programs at these
Yeah.
conferences. And then like if you want to learn the language, they'll have someone there helping teach language and stuff.
Oh.
Yeah, it was really neat. It was a fun time. My sister also came with me, and it was her first time there too. And we did like a scavenger hunt throughout, so we had to go all over Seoul. It was really neat.
Cool.
For stuff, yeah. So it's a really good experience. So yeah, so those types of things. The government is also starting to do more stuff, like they call them like what do you call it? Birth homeland tours or return, where you can sign up to go back to Korea if you've never been before,
Oh, wow.
and they'll send you. And yeah, so they're starting to offer to do like more stuff like that. So
Wow. So, I mean, yeah, because I feel kind of guilty because I didn't know. I actually thought it was pretty rare for a Korean adoptee to be here. Like, I didn't know that was like you threw out the number like 400,000 Korean children were adopted out of the country. That's a huge number. And I didn't know that there was that big of a community out there. And yeah, just I feel bad because I feel like we could be doing more to support Korean adoptees. But yeah, I was ignorant towards it. So thank you for the information. Yeah.
No, don't feel guilty. And that's something else I want to say too. Like, I am pretty open talking about being an adoptee in my experience, but there are a lot of adoptees who don't want to talk about it. They don't want to address it. And I've learned that through being here in Atlanta, where I think, oh, everyone's like me, but no, they're not going to come out and talk about it, and they don't want you to, acknowledge it So you do have to be careful. Everyone's very different with that. Like I'll post events of us doing adoptee stuff all the time. And I have to be very careful because some of the adoptees who come to the events, they don't want to be put out there like they're in this community. So but no, don't feel that way at all. Everyone's different. And yeah, I mean, you just, until you actually meet someone who's like open and wanting, you're not going to have that experience. But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to ask kind of one interesting thing about your story is like you said, you were married to a Caucasian person, but now you're in a relationship with an Asian American, right? So I wanted to ask you kind of how different is it, and like how did that come about? Like, is there things that you have to adjust to and things like that?
Yeah, no, it's definitely very different. Because I have never dated a non-white male before. So he is Korean American, and he's also divorced, and this is also the first time he has a child. So this is the first time I've also dated someone with a child. And yeah, so he pretty much grew up very much in a Korean traditional family, and so I'm learning a lot from him. he didn't actually grow up in Korea. He grew up in the Philippines. So
Oh,
he returned to Korea for high school and finished high school there. And he was born in Korea, but his family moved to the Philippines, and then he moved back for high school. And then from high school, he moved to actually Oklahoma, where I'm from, and he went to college at Oklahoma State University. So I think that's one of the things that really connected us. So, that was like his really first experience living in the United States.
mm,
And so yeah, we got connected through the KAC community. And it's been fun. I learn a lot. If I have questions, I ask him, and he's usually able to answer or find the answer if he doesn't have it.
mm.
When I was going through the whole reunion and learning about my birth family, that's actually when we started dating. So he was really supportive with that. His family does a lot of traditional Korean stuff, and which I've never experienced before. So that's really neat. But this is what's interesting. Like every Korean American's experience is different. Like he thinks all of his experience are very Korean and normal, but then I'll go to my other friends that are Korean American. They're like, we don't do that anymore. Like, so that's so I am learning a lot. I've become very comfortable hearing the language. So I don't know the language, but I hear it. And so that's something new to me. Like it's comforting almost to hear it. And I think that eventually will help me maybe like learn more. I've learned more words, but not hearing Korean for like 40 years and then all of a sudden hearing it all the time, so I feel like the last few years, I've changed a lot,
Wow. And on the subject of reunification, I wanted to ask you, I don't know if you already answered this or not, but in terms of like letting your adoptive parents know that you're going through this process, like how was that like? Did you feel any sort of tension or like, because you can almost feel like apologetic, right? Like as if I don't want to come off like I'm saying that you weren't great parents, so I'm gonna go try to find my like original family, right? So like,
Yeah.
how was that like?
So that is actually an issue that a lot of adoptees have. And I think when you ask a lot of adoptees, like, if you're going to search, the first thing they think about is like, they don't want to hurt their adoptive family's feelings. My situation was kind of like, and I've kind of always been like this too, is I'm just going to do what I want and they'll deal with it. Like, and then my parents know that. My parents actually were very supportive. I think, so my dad's remarried, and I am closer to my mom. And my mom, I think, was a little bit more like, okay, like she was supportive. And my dad, I don't think he really understood, but at no point did I feel like they were like, don't do that. But no, my mom was very supportive. She actually made a photo album for my birth family of me from my baby pictures all the way up to now, and put a lot of work and time into it. So I took that with me to Korea and gave it to them.
Wow.
And she thought it was great. And I think it's also like, I'm in my 40s now. So I think my mom's just like, why would you not want to know that? Maybe if I would have done this in my 20s or, maybe it would have been different. But I think now, where I'm at, she's like, why would you not want to know that? I think my dad was supportive, but he did, he didn't know what to say, but no, they thought it was cool. And but no, I do know that there's been situations where adoptees have had issues with their adoptive families not supporting them, and actually they will stop talking to them.
Oh, wow.
If they're communicating with their birth family. But no, I didn't have that situation. And then, also I'll share, my sister also decided to reach out and did the paperwork, and she also found out, she also kind of connected with her birth family too. She hasn't met them in person yet.
Wow.
But surprisingly, her story is the same as mine. So she's the youngest of 5 daughters, and she was also given up because she was a girl. So
Man, yeah. So I know, like growing up, I always knew that like the Korean like tradition was like males are more important, right? Because they can carry on the family name and all that kind of archaic stuff, right? But I just didn't know that it was that serious, where like they would give up children because they weren't male. So is that, I mean, there's two people that we know of. Like, is that pretty common?
Oh yeah, no, actually I've seen, because there's a Facebook group of Korean, it's private for only Korean adoptees. I think there's like 8,000 of us in it, and they are like, I've seen many others who've had the same situation where they'll find out. Yeah, so back then, yes, and I think it also was a little bit more like Korea made a lot of money off of selling us, and I think they were encouraged, because in my sister's family, so my sister's parents are both alive, so her birth mother is the one who wrote her the letter back, basically saying in a way that she was really upset when she, you know, found out learned my sister was a girl, and the nurse, I guess, talked her into giving her up for adoption. So I think that's the story. I have a feeling that has probably happened. I think a lot of families that, having another daughter and another mouth to feed, and they're already like having like, they already have 6 kids already. Like, it probably was easier to think, oh, okay, this baby will have a better life, and I'll get some money. So, but yeah. And I also will say something else with dating Korean Americans. So my boyfriend now, his family has been very supportive and open and stuff, me being an adoptee, but I know a lot of Korean American families, there's no way at all they would allow their Korean American child to date an adoptee. And I know a lot of adoptees who've gone through that because we're not seen, as being Korean enough. So another situation is like, I have been fortunate in that. And I do have a lot of adoptee friends who've been hurt in situations like that. So maybe as Korean Americans, that could be something, Korean Americans supportive of is, but it's not just that. I mean, a lot of Korean Americans don't want their children, or Asian Americans don't want their children dating or settling down with anyone who's not, Asian too. So.
Yeah, no, I think for the Korean American listeners out there, that's something that we definitely need to work on. I think first of all, being more aware, because all these things I'm learning and they're blowing my mind. But also being more acceptive and more welcome. And that's something, I mean, there's a lot of faults with, for all the good that the first generation did, like the traditional Korean Americans, they worked really hard to provide a good life for the second generation Korean Americans here. But they're not without their faults. So they have all these really archaic ways of thinking that I think us as second generation Korean Americans need to try to help them change, need to influence them to say, hey, like that is not okay to think these ways, to say that they're not Korean enough. I mean, whatever that means, like those kind of things. I think whenever we get the chance, we need to really combat that and try to fix in the minds of our parents and grandparents and things like that. Yeah. Well, so Amanda, we're approaching the hour mark, and I asked this to all my guests. Is there any part of your story and anything that we talked about that you wanted to get into that we didn't get into?
No, I'm trying to think. I think I covered everything. I just want to again stress, all of us, we're all very different. There is, it's just, there's a lot of similarities actually with Korean adoptees and Korean Americans, a lot of similarities. So I think as like for the Koreans and Korean Americans out there, just open up and you're welcome. Get in contact with me when we start having events again. I'll invite you, come join us. And then KAC also is a great organization. I really want to push if you can get involved and attend any of our stuff. We have a good time. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much for opening up and sharing your story with us, Amanda. I learned a ton. Some of the things that you said are still kind of like rattling in my brain. Like I can't really I'm still processing them. But I'm really thankful for the opportunity to increase my own awareness of the adoptees, Korean American adoptees.
Yeah, thank you. This has been great.
So for other listeners out there, if you have any questions or any feedback, please feel free to reach out to me at IHTHTpodcast@gmail.com. I hope they hear this abbreviated at podcast@gmail.com. Any questions that you might have for Amanda, feel free to let me know, and I'll try to make sure I'll channel those questions to you, Amanda, so that you can get those answered. And yeah, follow us on Instagram at I Hope to Hear This, and you can see the video of this podcast on YouTube. Just search I Hope to Hear This. And yeah, again, Amanda, thank you so much for your time. And for listeners, thank you for listening.